Our planet is dying. The desert grows with every passing year. The world is at war. But there is hope. An object has been detected deep within the group.
Welcome to Polygon.com. My name's Charlie Hall. I'm the features writer here, and I'm joined today with a few folks from Blackbird Interactive, the makers of Homeworld, Deserts of Kharak. I've got with me Rob Cunningham, the founder and CEO of Blackbird Interactive. Hello, Rob.
Hello there.
And I've also got Rory McGuire, the lead designer on Homeworld. How are you, Rory?
Good. Thanks for having us.
No big deal. Thank you guys for joining us. Now, recently you guys stopped into our San Francisco office and you brought with you the retail preview of the next title in the Homeworld series. And we got to watch you guys demo that for us. And that's some of the video that we're going to be playing in the background. But before we kind of got into the gameplay, I just wanted to, for the folks out there that might not be terribly familiar with the Homeworld series, if you could just introduce us to the Homeworld universe and tell us a little bit of the history of the franchise.
Sure, Charlie. So Homeworld was released in '99. It was Relic Entertainment's first game. At the time, it was sort of revolutionary because it was the first full 3D RTS, and we set it in space, and it had this full orbital camera that rotated all the way around the ships. And the vision was to create a very visceral, space combat game that reminded you of Star Wars and sort of Battlestar Galactica and the science fiction we loved. And that came out in '99. We continued at Relic, made Homeworld 2, and then nothing really happened with the Homeworld franchise for many years after that.
And then that franchise was picked up by the folks over at Gearbox, was it not?
Yeah, it was. So there was a bankruptcy auction from THQ, and the Homeworld property was one of the assets that was unbundled from that proceedings. So we thought, we were working on a game called Hardware at the time, Hardware Shipbreakers, and it was very much inspired by Homeworld. It looked like Homeworld, it sounded like Homeworld, and it was very similar in lots of ways. So we thought it would be a great idea to acquire the IP. So we got in there and did our best to acquire it, thinking no one would be interested in this thing. It turned out we were really wrong, and the bidding war started. We got blown out of the water almost immediately, and it went, thankfully, to Gearbox. So when they got it, we congratulated them, and we said, this is great. We're really excited you guys got it. You're another developer. We like your stuff. What are you going to do with it? And they're like, we don't know. We just love the IP. We have no plan, and maybe you could help us with that. So we met. We showed them Shipbreakers, and, it was a bit of a no-brainer. It was set on a desert planet. It seemed like a golden opportunity for a prequel to the Homeworld original game.
Well, real talk here. To what extent, though, is this, or was the Shipbreakers creation story a prequel story, a true prequel story to Homefront, and to what extent was it kind of shoehorned in?
It's an interesting question because it was shoehorned in a way, in the sense that we never built Hardware to be a Homeworld game, but it was very much inspired by it. In fact, the original art and sound and the whole feeling of it, we just really wanted to continue in that style and do something very similar. So when the opportunity presented itself, we were all into it. We definitely wanted to do it. So, there was a bit of shoehorning for sure, but for sure we wanted to do that.
All right, that's fair enough. And there's no reason to not try and hook the two together, given the popularity of the Homeworld canon of games that are out there. So, how does the carrier Capizzi and Miss Rachel Sajet, how do these characters and these things fit into the Homeworld universe? Really introduce us to the lore of Deserts of Kharak.
Okay, so in '99, Homeworld came out, and in the opening cutscene, there was a line, and it said, 100 years ago, an object was discovered deep in the desert. An expedition was sent. Now, this object turned out to be the Kartoba. There was the hyperspace core. the people of Kharak built a mothership around this core, and the events of Homeworld continued. So Deserts of Kharak is the story of the expedition that went out to find this shipwreck deep in the desert.
Very interesting. So what is going on this planet, though? A lot of the folks that are watching right now didn't quite get all the wonderful voiceover that your actors contributed to this. So really get us up to speed on what we're seeing right now as this carrier runs out of the gates.
So this is the carrier Capisi, and she is leaving Epsilon Base. Here go the doors. On the expedition into the Great Desert. It's a perilous expedition. The desert is hostile, and the Gaussian kith or clan are sort of nomads that live out in the desert, and they have a religious sort of theology against spaceflight, which is something your clan has been doing for some time. So there's a backdrop of tension in the world, and war is taking place, and this expedition is a effort to save the world, in a sense. That salvation lays out in the desert, and you're looking to find it against both the desert and the Gaussian tribe.
One thing to speak to as well is that Homeworld there's many elements of Homeworld. The most visible is that it's set in space, 3D, etc. One kind of key narrative and tone element of Homeworld that we want to make sure that we capture in this is the sense that you're on this epic journey, that you're facing these impossible odds, that behind you is kind of death and destruction. Every mistake that you make on that journey, you feel. We've kind of captured that with a sense of the expedition. We're heading into the desert because the planet is dying. It's kind of our last great hope, and it's on this carrier, the Capisi, and its crew.
Yeah, that's right. It's sort of like the desert version of the science fiction epic road trip.
Right.
But it also really harkens back a little bit to the roots of the RTS genre, right? One of the very first, if not the very first, truly successful RTS games was Dune, and that also was set in the desert.
Yeah, for sure. And right off the bat, fans were talking about two titles that were not Homeworld. One was Dune, the other was Ground Control. There's lots of Dune and Ground Control references on Reddit and various forums.
Now, I love the way that you guys very skillfully and very seamlessly blended not only the cutscenes, which are really high quality in my opinion, into the gameplay, but also this overworld map into the gameplay as well. Tell me about the scaling and the transitions and how you worked on those internally, what your goals were.
Well, the primary goal was to really capture the feeling of Homeworld and put it into a ground-based concept. So you can see the sensors manager there, and the scale of the terrain and the units. Rory, perhaps you could talk a little bit more about that.
For sure. Yeah, again, another staple of Homeworld as an IP is the sense of the scale that you have between the units is real. So not to use the term realistic liberally, but the small units are very small, the large units are overwhelmingly massive. And that's something that other titles kind of squish and kind of make work for gameplay, and Homeworld as an IP, we embrace it. We want to embrace that scale and this immense scale between the units. And that translates as well to the terrain. It translates to unit relationships and how they affect each other. But that sense of overwhelming, massive units is really key.
And so help me understand really kind of the technology at play here, because it's very unique to this world. I mean, we don't have massive desert-born carriers that look like they're supposed to be carrying around the space shuttle in this world. Like, how does this all work? How's it all related to each other? What are the themes here?
One of the key things that all of the Homeworld titles have is a sense of real intentionality and function in the design of the units and the vehicles. They're grounded in what they are in the world. If you take a unit and you zoom in and you look at the little greeble pieces on it and you ask an artist, what's this, it's not just there for appearance. The artists have thought through it. They've made it really real. And though that's an interesting talking point, I think players really, that comes through the screen at them, and they feel it, and they feel the kind of internal consistency of the world. So that's really one thing that we've tried to push and create this world of what would it be if these guys were living in this completely inhospitable planet. The deep desert is the equivalent of Australia, the bush in Australia. deep summer, 45 plus degrees centigrade, and these guys are living in that. I mean, it's really incredible.
G'day, mate.
Well, and I've heard soldiers out in theaters of combat in the Middle East describing that environment a lot like being in outer space because it's so inhospitable, especially when it gets up so hot. So how are these vehicles adapted to this environment?
It's interesting because it's very much a naval game. Like all of these ships, are moving out across this great sea. So, naval references was something we came back to time and again. And, that connects with the Homeworld IP as well, because the spaceships in Homeworld were very much also like naval ships, the classes of frigate, corvette, destroyer, carrier, so forth. We wanted the dunes to feel like waves. We wanted the heat of the desert to feel like the storms at sea, to really give you that sense of adventure. The ships themselves, well, they've got all sorts of things to keep them alive out in the desert. We're talking about ceramic plated armor, composite hulls. We're talking about various filters and baffles to keep the sand and heat away, and all sorts of technology the player has to research to survive out there.
And one of the key themes of the game too is that you aren't quite completely prepared. The main player faction, the Northern Coalition, they're from the poles actually, so they're venturing into the equator, and they're going to face the deep desert, and as a whole they aren't prepared for it. So there's going to be lots of environmental conditions. You can actually see one in the background right there is a massive sandstorm rolling in that they haven't faced before. There's other environmental effects, tornadoes, and at one point the heat itself actually becomes a gameplay mechanic that you have to fight.
Wow. So tell me more about these sandstorms. How are these gameplay elements? Man, I didn't actually even notice that the first watch through, but that thing is massive and just looming on the horizon there.
Yeah, it's coming.
Yeah. The next level after this actually features that storm pretty heavily.
Spoiler.
So what does it mean for gameplay, though, to be fighting amongst or on the edge of or inside of that storm?
It manifests differently in each level. So in the next mission, we introduce the sensors manager here, and this allows you to look out and see a map as a whole. You can cover about 10, 15, 25 kilometers with the sensors manager. And the next mission, it gets affected by the storm. You can't see that quite as well. You're maneuvering in the storm. Visibility is dramatically reduced. Units can't shoot as far. There's all manner of factors that come into play for it. And then a few missions after that, you'll face tornadoes that start to form in this canyon. At that point, you're dodging it, and the gameplay's a little bit different. We thought of the desert. In many ways, Homeworld kind of shows off the dangers of space, and we're kind of showing off the dangers of the desert.
Plus, there's this whole sort of climate change narrative taking place. Like the desert is actually growing and becoming worse and worse. So, to the characters and to the people of the world, their world is dying. The desert is growing. These sandstorms are getting worse. They've never seen it this bad. So it's a very desperate situation.
Traditionally, RTS games have been, more or less a series of tiered plateaus, right? Like the play space looks a bit like a layer cake in a lot of ways. This is not that. This is a rolling terrain with dunes. So tell me about that design choice, and also tell me about how line of sight works in your game.
Well, I'll pass the gameplay stuff over to Rory, but to begin with, Homeworld never had terrain, so we were very sensitive to making sure that the terrain in the world felt accurate, felt scaled, and felt like it was real. So we were inspired by Google Earth. We went out into Google Earth and looked into the deserts of the world. We were looking at Namibia. We were looking at China. We were looking for how the shape of the terrain worked, how the geometry and texture of these huge deserts worked, and we developed new technology to create these maps, so that the artist had a lot of flexibility to create RTS maps that really gave you this beautiful, sculpted, smooth, realistic terrain that, like Homeworld, seemed to go off into the distance forever. Rory, maybe tell us a little bit about the gameplay there.
Yeah, for sure. The terrain, as you said, Charlie, and it's a really good observation, is that RTSs tend to be these kind of plateaus, and there's a few reasons for that. One is that it's a lot easier to to develop and design. The other is it's a lot easier to communicate to the player that they can understand that this level is higher than this level. And we thought this was a really awesome challenge to tackle, is create this kind of rolling landscape that units are actually moving across and interacting with. So in this, what we're looking at right here, the Sensors Manager, this is a mission a little bit later in the game, and literally everything that we're looking at, this is about 25 by 25K, is these rolling dunes, and it's all gameplay space. All of your units can climb to the top of these dunes. The one unit that'll have a little bit of problems is the carrier, so we restrict a little bit where the carrier can and can't go, which creates interesting gameplay. But this space that we're looking at in front of us, that massive mountain dune, that's a gameplay space, so we can grab our units, we can go up, we can climb it. And one thing that we do to enable you to kind of understand some of these relationships is that as you grab units and you move them, you get this dial that will appear that will highlight low ground and high ground. And that gives the player pretty good feedback about where the breaks are, regardless of where your camera is. One concern with RTS is that your camera might be top down, it might be tilted a little bit, and you really need to understand what the terrain is doing or not doing for you. So we communicate high ground, low ground, and then also where line of fire is being broken.
And you also get a gameplay advantage from high ground.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, the terrain itself isn't just, we're not just selling the units moving across it. You actually get a substantial amount of gameplay advantage or disadvantage depending on how you use it. One thing that we really wanted to press is Homeworld has a lot of strategic elements, but the tactical elements in combat are fairly light. And we wanted to bring that up just a little bit. We didn't want to turn it into StarCraft 2, but obviously we want to add just a little bit of it. And one way that we found that to be really compelling is through terrain. So as you engage in battle, opponents will kind of jockey for position for terrain. So it creates a reason to maneuver in battle that isn't, it creates really interesting micro. It's not just there for you to jog and kind of create activity to keep you engaged. It's actually meaningful and strategic.
That's awesome. Now, one of the things that really surprised me was the power of the air units that the yellow faction here has. Tell me a little bit more about the different tiers and the different types of units that you give players to work with in the tactical space.
So the carrier here, the Capisi, she's like the mothership in Homeworld, which is your research, engineering, resource depot, and production facility. So she builds all manner of ships. The air units are just one class of the ships that can be built. So,
yeah, we've got 3 different types. We're showing 2 in this mission. We're showing the strike fighter and the bomber. And the way that these work is that you build them the way you build other units, and then you can call in anywhere on the map. You can call in a sortie. So you'd select your carrier, you've got hotkeys, or you can select the button manually, and that'll basically, they'll marshal on the deck, they'll fire out at the catapults, and then they'll move across the map at insanely high speeds and then come and hit your target. And in many ways it acts almost like an artillery strike, but they actually are units, so you can grab them, you can micro them, you can send them to a different target if you want to change targets, and they're strong at certain units. There are elements that will control airspace that you don't want to send your air units into. They'll actually get introduced a little bit later during this mission. Yeah, there they go, taking off.
That's a bomber.
Yeah, and they each have different specializations. So the strike fighter is good at really tight single target damage, whereas the bomber is better at lots of smaller units and taking out a large area of effect. And then our last air unit, which is introduced a little bit later in the game, is the gunship. And the gunship is, think of like a AC-130. It's a massive, massive gunship that just barrages an area over time. So it's more damage over time and a big area of effect.
I just love watching these little units interact with the carrier. The way the bomber, you were mentioning the greebles, the way the bombers ailerons maneuver back and forth to kind of move it left and right, but then how they land with their thrusters and just get pulled into the belly of the thing.
Yeah, this was something we spent a lot of time on. We wanted to get it right for a lot of different reasons. One is it's really cool. It's unique to the RTS genre. It pays homage to Homeworld. You have the trails that are going behind these units as they come in on the target, and you get a little bit of the spaghetti ball feel. So we really wanted to make these units feel awesome.
So tell me a little bit more about this mission in particular.
Yeah, so this mission takes place a little bit later in the game. I'm not going to give too many story spoilers, but this is player has full agency in this mission. The Galcian they're regrouping a little bit, and they're out. They've got production cruisers out that they're trying to resource, and the player, as I said, has agency of how they want to engage it. So the map is about 20K, 25K by 25K. and you decide how you want to approach these targets. There's 3 individual production cruisers, and then there's also a security patrol kind of moving around. The player does have a couple of their air units the first time they have them, so they're really powerful in this mission, especially given the size of it. So it's a really good opportunity for the player to play around, get a sense of how their air units work. And then there's a twist once we get a little bit further that I won't ruin.
We keep seeing this ring, this big green ring that overlays on top of the train. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that's showing players?
Yeah, so that's the terrain dial that I mentioned a little bit earlier. So if you recall in Homeworld, when you selected a unit and you gave an order, there was this nice dial that would expand, and that was mostly aesthetic, and it kind of just showed you where the unit was in terms of a 2D plane. We drafted behind that. We were inspired by that UI, but we also added this functional layer that it actually projects down onto the terrain, and it gives you a sense of high ground, of low ground. It shows you line of fire blockages, and it basically provides a tremendous amount of 3D detail from any 2D view.
And then as far as the green lines and the red lines, what are those showing us?
Those are move orders, attack orders. Anywhere where the red line is broken, it shows where your line of fire is broken. So basically we're just seeing the player here, which I think is me, is assigning targets. He's focus firing. He's not quite playing like a pro, but he's trying.
And then here comes an airstrike. I think you're dialing in here with these.
Yeah, those
right.
are those big
markers.
yellow discs.
That shows us their targets and who we're targeting. Worth pointing out is the smoke screen that I'm throwing down here. So we talked about the line of fire. We talked about the terrain system. We actually allow you to dynamically create that as well. So the smoke screen, you can throw it out, and it allows you to block an area for X amount of time. I think it's about 15 seconds, 10 seconds. And we find this really compelling because we have units with specialization. So we have fast-moving units that are strong at taking out artillery units. We have artillery units that are strong at taking out armored units, and so on and so forth. But we also wanted to have it so that players could soften those relationships. So by that I mean, if you have a long-range artillery unit firing at a slow-moving armor unit, that armor unit is going to get wrecked. It's going to have a really hard problem. But we added abilities like smokescreen that allow you to block line of fire to that artillery unit, that long-range unit. So that allows a player to soften that relationship and either retreat or force the long-range player to move in. And it just adds a lot of more interesting gameplay. And we kind of designed all of our units with that in mind of what would a player do if they're facing the unit that's specialized against them. How could they soften that? What interesting play could they do to make this a fun battle?
Now, so there's a campaign that the game is going to ship with when it comes out on January 20th.
That's right.
How many hours of gameplay would you say is part of that campaign, or how many missions, however you want to characterize it? I'm just curious.
I'd say it's about 10 to 12 hours, and then we're supporting obviously harder modes. One thing that we wanted to make sure that we captured from Homeworld is that there is challenge in the campaign. You can play it on easy, and you should beat most of the missions first try through, but on the higher difficulties, we have this concept called persistent fleet, which is something that comes from Homeworld. It's one of the few RTSs to do it, and that is that your fleet that you make in a mission will carry through into the next mission. That will carry through into the next mission. And the game is tuned around that, so it can be really challenging. You can actually hit a point where you have lost a good chunk of your fleet, and you need to examine what it is you're doing, regroup a little bit. You get on your back foot a good amount. So it should add some really interesting deliberation and choices that the player has to make over the course of the campaign as well.
Are the campaign missions influenced then? Like, are they branching at all, or is it pretty much just next mission, next mission, next mission?
They're linear. There is some non-linear choice and non-linear exploration within the missions, like this mission, for example. Again, attack objectives, however you like, but there is a linear narrative.
So then there's also a skirmish mode, I believe.
That's right, yeah. We're supporting skirmish, which is going to be basically multiplayer and multiplayer systems, but with you or up to 2 of your buddies playing cooperative against the AI.
There's a comp stomp.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Oh, that's great.
Skirmish is, it's our comp stomp. So we wanted to make sure that, to me, that's a staple of the RTS genre. If you're signing up to do a multiplayer mode, which you should for an RTS game, then you absolutely have to do a comp stomp. It's a really good bridge for players that finish the campaign, but aren't quite ready to, go into ranked and hit matchmaking and get really stomped by an opponent. It's a really good bridge if you want to keep playing the game without having that feeling that you're being outplayed consistently.
Well, and finally, I got to ask you about the multiplayer. When Shipbreakers was first announced, there was a lot of, conversation around it about how it was going to be this unique social experience. So, how much of that has been retained here in the final game, and what does multiplayer look like because of it?
We definitely retain the sense that we want to support social and cooperative elements, but the multiplayer is kind of classic RTS gameplay in the sense of you're pairing up with a few guys, you're facing an enemy on, we're inspired by kind of the historical locations on Kharak, and one element that we really wanted to push was what we call artifact retrieval. So we supported the classical modes of annihilation. We added another element called carrier annihilation, which is the game is over when you lose your carrier. But then we added a mode called artifact retrieval. And artifact retrieval speaks to the themes of the campaign, where it's about these technologies in the desert and you're securing them to kind of gain power and advantage over your enemy. But it also, we pushed a lot in several gameplay themes for artifact retrieval. So we looked at games like Company Heroes and Dawn of War that are about securing an objective and getting points from that, but we found it would be really interesting that if when we got that objective, we then had to move it. So artifact retrieval is about artifacts spawning in the map while you're jockeying for position with your opponent. You move those artifacts to an extraction zone, and then you get you secure that point. You get power on your carrier, which I'll talk a little bit about what that does. Once you hit a certain point, you win after you secure those artifacts. However, we don't get rid of any of the auxiliary objectives of destroying the opponent's carrier or annihilating the opponent's army. So there's this cool dynamic that happens where people focus on artifacts, they secure artifacts, they move them to the extraction zone, their army becomes slightly weaker because they're pushing that, and then they face an opponent trying to close out and kill their carrier. So there's really cool back and forth. And the mobility themes that we have of moving these objectives really make the multiplayer way more dynamic. So it's not just securing a position and holding it and kind of dominating map control. It's about getting an object and moving it. So it plays almost more like soccer or hockey, which we really like because the game is about mobility.
That sounds fascinating. I'm gonna have to give that a try. That kind of mobility that you're describing sounds really interesting, like a really nice wrinkle to bring to RTS. Can you tell me some more about this particular mission that we're seeing here? We talked about traditional RTSs and plateaus, and of course here we find ourselves pretty much on a plateau, but it looks like they're just being attacked from all sides in this particular mission.
Yeah, so this mission is, like we were looking at before, a little bit later in the campaign. Without giving away too much... Oh, cool. There's Roger coming into land. Distracted there. This mission is about a landing strip. So this big plateau here made of rock is kind of an example of sort of that scaled, unique terrain we wanted to develop for the game. But in the story, you're getting resupplied here. So there's just one place out in this huge desert that these big lander vehicles, these big transports can land. And this is one of those locations. So your objective here is to take and hold the hill, the plateau there, so that your resupplied landers can come in and help you out.
Well, it's been a long time since you guys really got to work within the Homeworld universe. What does it mean for you guys to really finally be able to return to this game that you've personally spent so much time on over the years?
It's just awesome. It's just so lovely. It's great to work with the same guys as before. It's great to work in the same IP and with the same style and feeling. It's always a favorite of mine and the other guys too. So it's just a lot of fun. It's great working with Gearbox because they were fans of the IP, obviously. So it's just like climbing into a lovely hot tub of warm, fuzzy feeling, really. It's just great. I mean, I could just, keep doing Homeworld stuff forever, but, it's just fun. It's fun. It's fun to expand the story. It's really fun interacting with the fans of the franchise and, seeing them get excited about the story and the world. And, it's just really exciting.
That's fantastic. Last thing to ask you guys about, any plans on the docket, things that you can talk about as far as DLC or continued support for the game going forward after release?
There'll be continued support after release, and we do have DLC plans. Obviously, we can't get into the details of what that is. But it's pretty cool. We're pretty excited about it.
Yeah, we'll definitely be supporting the game, and in particular, we're going to be watching what people are doing in multiplayer. See what problems may surface. RTS games, they're never quite finished, right? You're always tuning and polishing your multiplayer experience, for quite a while after development. So we'll be keeping an eye on that and listening to feedback from fans for sure.
Platforms and storefronts where it's going to be available on the 20th?
We'll be on PC on Steam.
Awesome. Well, I really want to thank you guys for taking the time to show the game off to us and to hop on the line and talk us through some of the opening blows and some of the later missions, and really just reintroduce me and hopefully some of our viewers here to the Homeworld universe. So I wish you guys a lot of luck on release, and again, thanks again.
Awesome. Thanks so much,
Awesome.
Charlie.
Thank you very much, Charlie.
Support crews are under attack. Immediate fire report on that position. Set new head.